Welcome back to Attacking Third. In the latest development of a story that has gripped the footballing world, FIFA has officially scrapped their proposal of selling a financial stake to private investors in a new company that would run events, including the World Cup. In a statement by FIFA President Gianni Infantino, he states, quote, "The FIFA Forward Enterprise Project was intended to provide a basis for further strengthening our FIFA member associations and our sport worldwide, especially in those countries where support is most needed. And more so, as we said from the onset, to do this only if a majority of the FIFA member associations were in support and always subject to a consultation process with them, the FIFA Council, the confederations, and wider stakeholders. Having listened carefully to all the views, it has become clear that the project has created divisions of a nature that, regardless of the level of support, are no longer in the interest of the objectives set out in the first place. Our purpose has always been and will always be to unite and improve. As a result, this proposal will not proceed. Moving forward, my intent is to bring all interested parties back together in the coming days and weeks in the spirit of shared interest in our game, and with the objective to continue growing football everywhere, particularly in those countries that mostly need our support." Following the retraction of FIFA's controversial proposal, both UEFA and Concacaf have said in an official statement that they have lost confidence in Gianni Infantino's leadership as FIFA president. Part of UEFA's statement reads, quote, "UEFA welcomes FIFA's decision to withdraw its plan to sell a stake in its competitions, including the World Cup, into private hands. The proposal was unanimously rejected by UEFA's national associations and by many other federations and confederations of all sizes around the world whose job it is to protect football. UEFA thanks all fans, leagues, clubs, players, individual associations, and confederations that oppose the scheme, alongside the many prime ministers, heads of state, and commentators who have demonstrated to the FIFA president that football is not for sale. We cannot keep going on like this with secret schemes on fast-track timescales cooked up by faceless individuals and of dubious benefit to the game. We must identify those responsible and hold them to account. It is right that in the coming days and weeks, UEFA will work with its associations and in close cooperation with other confederations to reflect on how this happened and devise a plan to make sure that it cannot occur again. That review should be thorough and fundamental. No option should be off the table. The current FIFA leadership has not only lost UEFA's confidence, but also that of many other members of the footballing family." For more on all of this, we are so pleased to welcome in our CBS Sports correspondent, Pardeep Khatri, to talk more about this. Hi, Pardeep. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. How are all of you?
We are good. We're excited to learn more from you. Can you kind of break down all that has kind of unraveled in the last 24 hours with this?
Yeah, it has all kind of developed very quickly, but I think what we've seen in the last 24 hours or so is this snowball effect of UEFA really taking the lead in expressing their disappointment and their outright rejection of FFE and this proposal, even going so far as to want to boycott FIFA events. And I think that sort of allowed the strength in numbers approach from the other confederations. Concacaf is one of them that also rejected it. And then the AFC said that they stand in solidarity with the other two, that if this had gone to a vote, which obviously it won't now, would have been enough for it not to pass. So FIFA had to pull the plug.
Pardeep, we saw UEFA and Concacaf both release those statements as you were talking about, but they also asked for reflection with leadership and who's making the decisions. What do you think that process will actually look like moving forward?
I mean, it very clearly means that the pressure is on Infantino now in a way that it hasn't been the case for years, or basically the entirety of his tenure. He, as of a couple of weeks ago, reportedly had more than 200 letters of support from the 211 total FIFA member associations. He's still running unopposed in March's FIFA election for president, as you know, until somebody decides to throw their hat in the ring. That's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. But I think there was something about the optics and actually probably the actual numbers of this FFE proposal that really force a lot of questions for these member associations that were otherwise mostly just resigned to having him in charge for another few years.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about Qatar and Morocco because they supported that plans should have been withdrawn.
but still support Infantino in a sense of still wanting to grow the game alongside FIFA. Do you think that changes the narrative of this story, if at all?
I think the question isn't whether or not Infantino has some support. I mean, the fact that CAF, that CONMEBOL, and OFC never actually really said anything until, CONMEBOL did issue a statement quite late last night, was a sign that there wasn't like wholehearted opposition. But again, it's now just a numbers game. I'm curious to see if Infantino will now sort of use the next several weeks and months to mount this, I don't know, perhaps an apology tour or something like that to win back the support that he very clearly felt he had without actually checking. So I'm not so sure that those votes of support will be enough is the question. Though, again, it's not that much of a surprise that he still has some supporters out there.
Looking for votes, looking for the apology tour. I mean, what's next for FIFA and Infantino? Because even in the statements, they talked about a big loss of confidence, a question in how this even came to be. Where do they even go from here?
I mean, there are a lot of options on the table. Obviously, one thing to really keep an eye on is if somebody else throws their hat in the ring to actually become the FIFA president at some point or another. Candidates have until mid-November to submit their interest, and there are some names floating out around there. There's reporting to suggest that UEFA would back Nasser Al-Khelaifi, the PSG president, but it's not sure if he's interested. There is also some reporting to suggest that Victor Montagliani, the Concacaf president, might be interested. Again, none of these people have actually formally declared. So that's something to keep an eye on. Also, there is technically an option for federations to force an emergency Congress and a vote of no confidence, basically, and try to get Infantino out of the job before the election. That would only require 43 member associations to say yes to that emergency Congress. And if, UEFA, who has been leading the charge in terms of the opposition, if they're the only ones that say we want the emergency Congress, they've got 55 member associations. They could probably do it pretty quickly if that is a route that they chose.
Pardeep, thank you so much for breaking this all down. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more on this, we are really excited to welcome in Chris Whittingham, our CBS Sports analyst, to talk a little bit more about the inside and behind the scoop of this. Hey, Chris, last 24 hours have been all over the place. How are you, and what have you made of the last 24 hours?
Yeah, it's been pretty wild because we talked about it a fair deal on the network throughout the week. This notion that Gianni Infantino seemed to be in this incredibly powerful position with the way that he handled this World Cup, really from the beginning. This 2026 World Cup has been a tribute to Gianni Infantino's power, his ability to get through hydration breaks into the games, his ability to handle the current U.S. administration, his ability to handle all the issues, including the Flair and Balogun thing. He didn't really get that much blowback from it, and yet this is the thing that he pushed the boat out on. He went all in with all his chips and said, I'm going to go and now try and get this private equity deal. I'm going to try and set myself up for my future after I'm term limited as FIFA president. And it's all come crumbling down in a week. It felt like he's been the FIFA president since 2017. It felt like he had an iron grip on this organization over the course of the last 10 years. The organization has gone along with everything that he's decided to do. And yet now it seems like his presidency is very much hanging by a thread at the moment. And this idea was shouted down by several confederations to the point where he has to retreat before we can even really get to a vote. So I think this has been a fairly shocking twist of the reality that FIFA and Gianni Infantino found themselves in, because coming into this, I honestly would have thought that he would have been able to power this one through, and yet there's enough strong voices, there's enough pushback led by the folks at UEFA in order to get this canceled and annulled ultimately.
Woody, how much power does it show that the rest of the footballing world has? Because you said, yes, Infantino, pretty much everything he's put up has been greenlit. But what about the solidarity of all of these other federations and organizations that turned this around in 24 hours?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to what UEFA bring to the party. Yes, the other votes are incredibly important, but when UEFA say, we're not going to participate at the World Cup, that is such a big threat. That is such a big and monumental decision to basically say, we're taking out the current winners, we're taking out 6 of the 8 quarterfinalists, and we're not going to put up with the fact that really their interests have not been served by FIFA for a good long while. Going back to even the expansion of the Club World Cup, obviously UEFA have control of major club football through the UEFA Champions League, and the UEFA teams have generally not wanted the expansion to 48 teams, and realistically, FIFA does not represent the interests of the powerful, or at least the best teams in this sport. It represents the votes of the many, of the countries, many of whom don't even really have much of a shot of getting into the World Cup because of the 1 vote per country rule that they have. There are a lot of countries that have just been along for the ride because they're on the gravy train. They're making the money, whereas the countries that actually drive the value, that drive the interest in this sport, namely in UEFA and in CONMEBOL, have largely been put on the sidelines. So the fact that now UEFA are exercising their power, it is fascinating. And then you look at the other member nations of CONCACAF, for instance, a confederation that has benefited greatly from the increase in the amount of revenue that is generated by FIFA in the form of the payments that they receive. And yet there are nations that don't even really have much of a chance of qualifying for the World Cup that decided we're going to go along with this. And even though we might cost ourselves money in the short term, the longer term ownership of the World Cup is a much bigger deal for the FIFA member association. So yeah, I think the power of the collective, and I think the only frustrating thing out of this that we've seen is that it wasn't exercised sooner, that there weren't stronger statements about issues in the Qatar World Cup, issues with this World Cup held in the United States, and that ultimately, when it comes down to it, the power only gets flexed when it comes down to the longer term money that all these federations stand to make.
Do you think this will continue to play out, Whitty, or what do you think the actual outcome for Infantino and FIFA will be?
Well, I think there's kind of 2 prongs to this. I think with Infantino, I absolutely think this is a huge vote of no confidence for him. I think this is a fairly significant shot for him. This is, if you're a politician, right, you have one big policy initiative, you go all in, and it doesn't work out, you're probably going to lose your job either through the voters or through resignation. That's generally how politics works. And so this is the thing that he pushed the boat on, and he has completely failed. He couldn't get enough support. He did this under the cloud of darkness and ultimately couldn't convince enough people that despite the fact that they stood to make a lot of cash now, that they wouldn't benefit later, and that this plan wasn't going to work. He cost himself any number of senior advisors. The senior advisors are fleeing him. Some of his biggest allies are fleeing him. So this is incredibly huge for a presidency. But Jen, in terms of the other point, I think as it relates private equity being involved in FIFA in the future, I wouldn't necessarily rule it out. I do think that this plan did not come together. The people that were involved, particularly the fact that the last name Kushner was involved as it relates to the Trump administration, I think played a huge role in the fact that this was received so poorly. But I wouldn't be surprised. We've seen a lot of leagues, we've seen a lot of sporting entities take on private equity investment. I still wouldn't be surprised if this was put out to a more fair tender, if multiple firms decided that they wanted to bid for the rights maybe to invest into the FIFA enterprises, as they're calling it, into the longer term. I would be surprised if that came back in some way, because I don't necessarily think it was the worst idea. It was just the execution that was truly dreadful.
Chris, I'm with you. I don't think this is the end of all of this and what we will hear. Thank you so much for all your insight.
Thank you.
All right, ladies, Chris just mentioned it. It is not the fact that this is done completely. We might get some more investors in, but in the immediate, there are Women's World Cup qualifiers coming up in just a few weeks, a couple of Youth International World Cups happening, Darian. How does the uncertainty of all of this, where the proposal was there, the proposal was pulled back, how does that affect the players that now have to compete?
I mean, it's scary because we played Youth World Cups, and it's terrifying that you're working for this. This is what's setting you up for your future. This is what's giving you the opportunities. This is the growth of the women's game that has been taking over the world, as we've been calling it. And the timing of this is very, very suspect. That the ones that would be the most hurt by all of the confusion, all of the processes, the gray areas that we're all floating in would affect all of the women's youth, some of the men's youth, but then eventually the Women's World Cup. And it sucks that we would be the ones suffering from it. And I'm glad that it's been turned around and we're not seeing the result of it in the immediate future. But it's scary to know that that is an option, and the timing of it, it's very suspect on how it would directly affect the women's game.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, right? That the fear doesn't go away. I think everyone's talking, it might have been withdrawn now, and the proposals might come around later in the season, but as a player, you want to be focusing on the task at hand. You want to be worrying about your league you're just about to start or still in. You want to be focusing on qualifiers and potentially, playing next summer a major tournament. Every single summer or major tournament from the women's game is such a huge part of growth. And if I was still playing and I just saw Scotland men become, you know, a force in football, okay, didn't get the group, but like incredible tournament for a fan perspective, I am doing everything to try to get to Brazil next summer. And the thought of that potentially being taken away, okay, they haven't qualified yet, but potentially not to have a summer is just shocking.
Or not even have the chance to qualify.
Exactly.
That's what was potentially even being taken from all of these nations. And the thing is it would directly affect the women's game and the growth and all the momentum that the women's game has had over the last 8 years.
Which we still need, and that's the important. The game is still on a trajectory, but it still needs that growth. It's nowhere near where it needs to be yet, so that is the really sad part. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but I think that fear will still be potentially there for a lot of players.
Which is terrible to think about. As you mentioned, Jen, they should just be focusing on playing,
Right.
getting on the pitch, qualifying, winning a Youth World Cup, competing in a Youth World Cup. Thank you guys for your input on that. It is so important. Of course, the network will continue to cover this unfolding story, but that does it for us today in Attacking Third. Thanks so much. Stick right here. More Golazo Network next.